Stop everything you're doing right now because I need you to understand that what happened on SmackDown wasn't just shocking, it wasn't just unexpected, it was the single most earth-shattering moment we've witnessed in years, and if you're not absolutely losing your mind over the fact that Femi, a relatively unknown NXT talent that casual fans barely knew existed, just walked onto the main roster and absolutely destroyed Brock Lesnar, the Beast Incarnate, the Conqueror, the most legitimately dangerous human being to ever step foot in a WWE ring, then you haven't grasped the magnitude of what we just witnessed. Brock Lesnar doesn't lose clean, Brock Lesnar doesn't get destroyed, Brock Lesnar doesn't lay on his back staring at the lights while some new guy stands over him looking like a conquering warrior, but that's exactly what happened on SmackDown, and the wrestling world is in complete meltdown trying to process how WWE just took their most protected asset, their nuclear option, their final boss, and fed him to someone most main roster fans had never even heard of before last night. And before you tell me this was a fluke, before you suggest Brock wasn't taking it seriously or that there must be some explanation that makes this make sense, I need you to sit down, strap in, and let me walk you through exactly what happened, why it happened, what it means for the future of WWE, and why you should be either furiously angry or incredibly excited depending on whether you're a Brock Lesnar fan or someone who's been waiting years for fresh blood to shake up the established hierarchy. Let me set the scene because context is absolutely critical to understanding why this moment is so monumental, so paradigm-shifting, so fundamentally game-changing for WWE's landscape. Brock Lesnar has been the final boss of WWE for over a decade, the guy they wheel out when they need someone to look unstoppable, when they need a match that feels special, when they need credibility transferred from an established star to a rising one. Brock's resume is absurd, he's beaten everyone worth beating, he's held every title worth holding, he's broken The Undertaker's WrestleMania streak which was supposed to be the most sacred accomplishment in wrestling history, he's dominated Roman Reigns, John Cena, CM Punk, Daniel Bryan, AJ Styles, literally every single main event talent you can name has been fed to Brock at some point and made to look inferior. Brock exists in this rarefied air where beating him is considered one of the greatest possible achievements in WWE, where just surviving a match against him is enough to boost your credibility, where his presence alone elevates anything he's involved in because everyone knows Brock is different, Brock is special, Brock is the measuring stick by which all other monsters are judged. Femi, on the other hand, is someone that even hardcore WWE fans who watch NXT religiously only became aware of relatively recently, a massive Nigerian powerhouse who's been tearing through the NXT roster with frightening ease, a genetic specimen who stands 6'4" and weighs 275 pounds of pure muscle, moving with an agility and grace that should be impossible for someone his size, combining raw power with surprising technical skill and an intensity that jumps off the screen even through your television. Oba has been NXT North American Champion, has been positioned as one of the developmental brand's top monsters, has had incredible matches with talents like Trick Williams and Wes Lee and Joe Coffey, building a reputation within the NXT ecosystem as someone special, someone destined for great things, someone who could potentially be a future main event star on Raw or SmackDown. But there's a massive difference between being a big fish in the NXT pond and surviving on the main roster where the competition is fiercer, the spotlight is brighter, and the margin for error is non-existent, and an even bigger difference between being a main roster competitor and being someone who can stand across the ring from Brock Lesnar and be taken seriously. SmackDown started normally enough, with the usual opening segments and matches and storyline developments that keep the weekly show moving, and there was no indication, no warning, no hint that we were about to witness something historic. Brock Lesnar's music hit, that now iconic theme that makes arenas explode and immediately raises the energy level because everyone knows when Brock shows up something significant is about to happen, and Brock walked to the ring with that characteristic bouncing intensity, that predator energy that makes him seem like he could snap at any moment and destroy everything in his path. Paul Heyman wasn't with him, which is notable because Heyman has been occupied with the Vision storyline on Raw and apparently isn't managing Brock on SmackDown anymore, so Brock was alone, which potentially made him more dangerous because there's no voice of reason, no one to talk him down or manipulate situations to his advantage, just pure unleashed Brock Lesnar with no filter and no management. Brock grabbed a microphone, which is always interesting because Brock rarely talks, usually lets Heyman do all the verbal heavy lifting, so when Brock decides to speak you know it's important, you know he has something significant to say. Brock's promo was classic Brock, short, intense, direct, no flowery language or complex metaphors, just Brock stating that he's the most dominant force in WWE history, that he's beaten everyone worth beating, that nobody on SmackDown or Raw or anywhere else in the company can touch him, and he issued an open challenge to anyone in the back who thought they were man enough to step in the ring with the Beast Incarnate. The crowd was eating it up, chanting for various names, probably expecting someone like LA Knight or Cody Rhodes or maybe even Roman Reigns to answer the challenge and set up some huge main event match, and there was this electric anticipation in the arena, the sense that something big was about to happen but nobody knew exactly what. And then Femi's music hit. Except most people in the arena didn't recognize Femi's music because they don't watch NXT, don't follow developmental, don't know who this massive African warrior walking down the ramp with supreme confidence is supposed to be. The commentary team, to their credit, immediately started putting Oba over, talking about his dominance in NXT, his championship reign, his physical tools and potential, trying to educate the audience on who this person was and why they should take him seriously. But you could hear the confusion in the crowd. You could sense people wondering if this was a joke, if this was some kind of setup, if WWE seriously expected them to believe this NXT guy was about to have a competitive match with Brock Lesnar. Even Brock looked momentarily confused, maybe even amused, like he couldn't believe some rookie had the audacity to answer his challenge, and there was this tension in the air where you genuinely didn't know if this was going to be a 5-second squash where Brock destroyed Oba to send a message, or if WWE had something more interesting planned. The bell rang and Brock immediately went on the offensive because that's what Brock does. He doesn't feel out opponents or start slow, he attacks with overwhelming force right from the opening bell, and he charged at Oba looking to hit an early German suplex or F5 and end this before it really started. But Oba sidestepped, showed that agility I mentioned earlier, and caught Brock with a massive shoulder block that actually staggered the beast, actually made Brock take several steps backward and look surprised, and that's when everyone realized this might not be the squash match we expected. Oba followed up with strikes, heavy clubbing blows and forearms that were stiff enough you could hear them connecting even in the upper deck, and Brock was absorbing the punishment but you could see he was feeling it, was actually having to defend himself rather than just walking through a fence like he usually does against smaller opponents. The match became this incredible back and forth that nobody expected, with Brock hitting his signature offense, German suplexes and belly-to-belly throws and those devastating knees to the midsection, but Oba was kicking out, was absorbing Brock's best moves and getting back up, was showing a resilience and toughness that made him look legitimate, made him look like he belonged in this spot rather than looking overmatched. Oba hit a spinebuster on Brock that shook the ring, the impact sounding like a car crash, and the crowd was starting to get into it, starting to realize they might be witnessing something special, starting to chant for Oba even though they'd barely known his name 15 minutes earlier. Brock's facial expressions were perfect throughout this, showing frustration and genuine surprise that this opponent was more than he expected, that his usual tactics weren't working as efficiently as they should, and that selling made Oba look even more credible because if Brock Lesnar is concerned, the audience should be concerned. The finish came out of nowhere and that's what made it so devastating, so shocking, so completely world-altering. Brock set up for the F5, got Oba on his shoulders in that position we've seen 1,000 times, the position that usually signals the end of the match and another victim added to Brock's body count, but Oba shifted his weight, slipped out behind Brock, and hit what can only be described as the most devastating spear I've ever witnessed in professional wrestling. This wasn't a regular spear, this was Oba exploding through Brock like he was trying to separate his spine from his body, the impact so thunderous that you could feel it through the television screen, and Brock crumpled, just collapsed in a heap like he'd been shot, and Oba covered him. The referee counted 1, 2, 3, and the arena went completely silent for about 2 seconds before erupting in the loudest mixed reaction I've heard in years, people cheering because they'd just witnessed history, people booing because their hero had just lost, people just making noise because they couldn't process what they'd seen. Oba Femi stood over Brock Lesnar's unconscious body and let out this primal roar, this declaration of dominance that echoed through the arena, and the visual of this relatively unknown NXT talent standing tall while Brock Lesnar, the most protected wrestler in modern WWE history, lay defeated at his feet, is an image that's going to be replayed forever, that's going to define both men's careers, that represents a genuine changing of the guard moment. The commentary team was losing their minds, selling this as one of the biggest upsets in WWE history, as a star-making moment for Oba Femi, as potentially the beginning of the end for Brock Lesnar's reign of dominance, and the hyperbole didn't feel unearned because this was genuinely that significant, genuinely that shocking, genuinely the kind of moment that only happens once every few years if you're lucky. The internet immediately exploded, social media went into complete meltdown, with people debating whether this was brilliant or terrible booking, whether WWE just created a new main event star or whether they destroyed Brock Lesnar's aura for no good reason, whether Oba Femi earned this win or whether it was too much too soon. The pro-Oba faction, and this group grew significantly after witnessing his performance, argues that this is exactly how you make new stars, that you have to be willing to sacrifice established names to elevate new talent, that Oba's physical tools and performance in the match justified the win, that WWE has been too protective of their veterans for too long and this represents a willingness to actually push fresh faces rather than recycling the same main eventers for another decade. This group points out that Oba is young, incredibly talented, has the look and the presence to be a major star, and that beating Brock gives him instant credibility that would take years to build through normal wins and losses against mid-card talent. The anti-Oba or pro-Brock faction is furious, absolutely livid that WWE would sacrifice Brock Lesnar's mystique, his aura of invincibility, for someone who hasn't proven themselves on the main roster yet, who hasn't drawn money or moved ratings or sold tickets. This group argues that Brock is one of WWE's most valuable assets, that his special attraction status is what makes him worth the presumably massive amount of money WWE pays him, and that having him lose clean to an NXT call-up on regular television rather than at a major pay-per-view diminishes his value and makes future Brock Lesnar matches feel less special. They argue that Oba could have been built up gradually, could have worked his way through the roster and earned a match with Brock months from now after establishing himself, and that this rush to make him a star might backfire if audiences reject him or if he's not ready for the pressure of being positioned as the guy who beat Brock Lesnar. Both perspectives have merit, both contain valid points, and that's what makes this such a fascinating moment to analyze and debate, because WWE made a choice that's genuinely controversial, genuinely divisive, genuinely risky in ways that modern WWE usually isn't. WWE has been criticized for years for being too safe, for protecting their top stars too much, for never pulling the trigger on new talent until they've been thoroughly tested and focus grouped and sanitized, and this moment with Oba beating Brock is the opposite of safe. Is WWE taking a genuine gamble on someone based on potential rather than proven main roster success? And whether that gamble pays off or blows up spectacularly, we won't know for months or maybe even years, but the willingness to make the gamble at all is noteworthy and potentially indicative of a new philosophy in WWE's creative approach. Let's talk about Oba Femi as a performer, because if WWE is going to build their future around him, if they're positioning him as the next great monster heel or dominant champion, we need to understand what he brings to the table beyond just impressive physical statistics. Oba has this incredible presence, this aura of danger and intensity that can't be taught or manufactured, that some performers just naturally possess, and he had it even in NXT when he was working in front of a few hundred fans in the Performance Center. His in-ring work is surprisingly diverse for someone his size. He can work as a pure power wrestler, throwing people around and hitting devastating slams, but he can also go hold for hold with technical wrestlers, can keep up with high flyers when necessary, has shown personality and character work in his promos and backstage segments that indicates he's more than just a physically impressive specimen. Oba's background is interesting. He's Nigerian-born but trained in wrestling in the United States, brings a legitimate athletic background from playing football at a high level, and has that combination of natural athleticism and learned wrestling skill that produces the best performers. But let's be real about the challenges Oba faces moving forward, because beating Brock Lesnar is actually the easy part. The hard part is maintaining that momentum, living up to the expectations that come with such a massive victory, proving that he deserves to be in this spot rather than being exposed as someone who got lucky or who benefited from WWE trying to make a shock moment. The Smackdown roster is stacked with talent, established stars who've been grinding for years and might resent this newcomer getting pushed ahead of them, and Oba is going to have to navigate that locker room dynamic while also delivering performances that justify his position. The audience is going to scrutinize everything he does, looking for weaknesses, questioning whether he's ready for the spot, comparing him to every other monster push that failed when the initial shock wore off and people realized the performer wasn't actually that special. WWE's graveyard is full of physically impressive performers who got pushed too hard too fast and couldn't handle the pressure, couldn't connect with audiences beyond their initial impact, couldn't evolve beyond being just big and strong, and Oba needs to make sure he doesn't become another cautionary tale. Brock Lesnar's reaction to this loss is going to be absolutely critical to how the story develops, because Brock doesn't just lose and move on to something else like a normal wrestler would. When Brock loses, especially when he loses clean in the middle of the ring without interference or shenanigans, it's a major story point that has to be addressed and explained and avenged. I expect Brock to be absolutely furious, to come back even more aggressive and dangerous than before, to demand a rematch or multiple rematches until he gets his win back and restores the natural order where he's the dominant monster and everyone else is beneath him. The rematch clause is basically guaranteed, probably at the next SmackDown pay-per-view, and that match is going to be even more brutal than this first encounter, because Brock will be fighting not just to win but to prove that this first loss was a fluke, was him underestimating his opponent, was anything except the beginning of his decline. The booking of that rematch will tell us everything we need to know about WWE's confidence in Oba Femi and their plans for Brock Lesnar going forward. If Oba wins again, if he beats Brock in a rematch on pay-per-view, then we know WWE is fully committed to making him a top guy, is willing to definitively move on from Brock as their ultimate final boss and establish Oba as the new standard bearer. If Brock wins the rematch and they go to a rubber match, we're looking at a more extended program that could carry through multiple pay-per-views and give both men plenty of opportunities to have great matches and build this into a legendary feud. If Brock wins the rematch decisively and Oba is positioned as having gotten lucky the first time, then we know WWE had second thoughts, decided the experiment wasn't working, and is course correcting back to the safety of established stars, and that would be incredibly disappointing for everyone who got excited about the possibility of real change in WWE's hierarchy. The rest of the SmackDown roster has to be watching this situation very carefully because it affects all of them. If Oba Femi is now positioned above everyone because he beat Brock Lesnar, then established stars like LA Knight and AJ Styles and Kevin Owens, who've been building their credibility for years, suddenly have to deal with this new guy jumping ahead of them in the pecking order. Some wrestlers will embrace working with Oba, will see it as an opportunity to have interesting programs with fresh talent and potentially elevate themselves by association, but others will resent the leapfrogging, will feel like they've paid their dues and earned the right to be in top positions before someone from NXT comes up and gets immediately pushed to the moon. These backstage dynamics matter because they affect morale, they affect how people work together, they affect the overall quality of the product when wrestlers are happy and motivated versus frustrated and resentful. Paul Heyman's absence from Brock's corner for this match has people speculating about whether that was a factor in the loss, whether Heyman's special counsel and strategic guidance is what's been keeping Brock successful all these years, whether without Heyman's management Brock is vulnerable in ways he wasn't before. This is probably reading too much into things, probably just a coincidence of timing because Heyman is busy with the vision on Raw, but it does create an interesting narrative possibility where Brock realizes he needs Heyman, swallows his pride and goes to recruit Heyman back, only to find that Heyman has moved on and isn't interested in managing Brock anymore. That rejection could further damage Brock's mystique, could make him seem desperate and past his prime, could accelerate whatever decline WWE has planned for him as they transition into building new stars like Femi as the face of the company. The broader implications for NXT call UPS is another fascinating angle to explore because for years NXT talents have struggled to gain traction on the main roster, have been presented as inferior to Raw and Smackdown regulars, have had to essentially start over and rebuild their credibility despite being champions and top stars in developmental. Femi getting immediately pushed to beat Brock Lesnar sends a very different message, tells NXT talent that their accomplishments matter, that they can come to the main roster and be treated as legitimate threats rather than rookies who have to pay their dues all over again. This could fundamentally change how NXT call UPS are perceived and received by audiences, could make future transitions smoother, could help retain talent who might otherwise get frustrated by the lack of respect they receive when moving to Raw or SmackDown. But it also sets an incredibly high bar, creates expectations that most NXT call UPS won't be able to meet, because not everyone can beat Brock Lesnar in their first major main roster match, and managing those expectations will be a challenge for WWE Creative. The promo Oba cut after the match, standing in the ring while Brock was being helped to the back by medical personnel, was short but effective, establishing his character as a confident warrior who came to WWE to conquer, who doesn't respect reputations or legacies, who only cares about proving he's the most dominant force in professional wrestling. Oba's delivery was intense but controlled, showing he can cut a promo without screaming or over-emoting, that he understands his character and can communicate effectively with the audience. The content of the promo positioned him as a respectful warrior rather than a cocky heel, acknowledging Brock's legendary status while making it clear that legends mean nothing if you can't beat the next generation, and that positioning gives WWE flexibility in terms of whether they want Oba to be a heel or a tweener or eventually a babyface, because his character isn't locked into one specific alignment yet. The commentary during and after the match deserves praise because they did an excellent job of selling the magnitude of what happened, of putting over both Brock's legacy and Oba's potential, of making this feel like a genuine historic moment rather than just another match on another episode of SmackDown. Michael Cole's call of the finish was perfect, his voice rising in disbelief and excitement as Oba hit that spear and covered Brock, and those calls matter because they help tell the audience how to feel, help frame moments as important or unimportant, and the commentary team clearly understood they were witnessing something significant and conveyed that appropriately. The post-match analysis and discussion, with commentators debating what this means for both men going forward, continued the good work by not just moving on immediately to the next segment but giving the moment room to breathe and sink in. Social media reactions have been incredible to watch unfold, with wrestling analysts and podcasters and fans all scrambling to give their hot takes, all trying to be the first to declare whether this was genius or disaster, all creating video essays and Twitter threads breaking down every aspect of the match and the decision to have Oba win. The memes started almost immediately, images of Oba standing over Brock with various humorous captions, comparisons to other times unknown wrestlers beat established stars, speculation about what comes next presented in joking formats that nonetheless contain genuine analysis and predictions. Wrestling social media at its best is a fascinating ecosystem of instant reaction and thoughtful analysis coexisting, and this moment has produced both in abundance, has given the community something genuinely surprising to discuss and debate rather than just more of the same predictable booking we complain about so often. The concern some people have raised about Oba's inexperience is legitimate, because there's a significant difference between working NXT-style matches in front of a small crowd where mistakes can be covered and everyone's generally supportive, versus working main roster matches on live television in front of 15,000 people where errors are magnified and the audience might turn on you if you botch something important. Oba looked very smooth in this match with Brock, didn't have any noticeable mistakes or awkward moments, but that was one match, and the question is whether he can maintain that level of performance week after week, pay-per-view after pay-per-view, without the novelty wearing off and people starting to notice flaws. WWE's production team can help cover weaknesses through camera work and editing, but ultimately Oba has to deliver in the ring, has to continue improving, has to show that he's not just physically impressive but also a skilled worker who can have great matches with different opponents and styles. Brock Lesnar's legacy is secure regardless of this loss, because one defeat doesn't erase a decade of dominance, doesn't diminish the incredible matches he's had or the moments he's created or the genuine aura of danger he's brought to WWE programming. But this loss does change the narrative around Brock, does plant the seed that maybe he's past his peak, maybe the next generation is catching up, maybe the beast isn't quite as unstoppable as he used to be. And depending on how old Brock is, how much longer he plans to wrestle, whether he's interested in transitioning from final boss to veteran putting over younger talent, this could be the beginning of a new phase in his career where he's still special and still dangerous but no longer invincible, no longer the automatic favorite in every match he's in. That transition can be done well, can create compelling storytelling where Brock fights against Father Time and eventually accepts his role as an elder statesman, or it can be done poorly, can feel like a sad decline where we watch a legend become a shell of himself, and WWE's handling of Brock's booking over the next year will determine which path we're on. The business side of this decision is interesting to consider because Brock Lesnar is presumably one of WWE's highest paid performers, commands a huge salary because of his name value and his ability to draw money, and having him lose on regular television to an NXT call-up potentially devalues his special attraction status that justifies that salary. WWE must have decided that the long-term benefit of establishing Oba Femi as a star outweighs the short-term cost of damaging Brock's aura, must believe that Oba has the potential to eventually draw money and move ratings comparable to what Brock provides, and that's a significant vote of confidence in Oba's potential. But it's also a risk, because if Oba doesn't pan out, if audiences reject him or he doesn't improve quickly enough or injuries derail his push, then WWE will have sacrificed Brock's mystique for nothing, will have made a bad investment that weakens their roster rather than strengthening it. The match quality itself was actually really good, better than many people expected, with both men working hard and telling a compelling story of the established monster meeting his match and an unexpected challenger. Brock bumped and sold for Oba in ways he doesn't always do for opponents, making Oba's offense look devastating and legitimate, and that generosity in the ring from someone of Brock's status speaks to his professionalism and his willingness to do what's best for business even if it means making himself look vulnerable. Oba meanwhile showed he could hang with the best, could work at the pace and intensity required for main roster television, could deliver the big moments and dramatic near falls that make matches memorable. The pacing was excellent, building from initial exchanges through increasing intensity to a climactic finish that felt earned rather than rushed, and the crowd was into it by the end despite their initial confusion, which is the best measure of whether a match worked. So where does SmackDown go from here? You've got Oba Femi now positioned as someone who beat Brock Lesnar, which means he needs to be in main event programs, needs to be challenging for championships or at minimum working with top-tier talent in feuds that feel important. You've got Brock Lesnar presumably seeking revenge, demanding explanations, trying to reclaim his spot at the top of the food chain. You've got the rest of the SmackDown roster adjusting to this new hierarchy, figuring out where they fit and how they can use this situation to their advantage. The possibilities are endless, and if WWE handles this well, if they commit to Oba and give him meaningful storylines that continue building his credibility, if they use Brock's desire for revenge to create great matches and moments, this could be the beginning of an incredibly exciting era for SmackDown where the show feels genuinely unpredictable and fresh rather than just going through familiar motions with established stars. The YouTube wrestling community is going to be analyzing this moment for months, creating every possible video about it, from match breakdowns to fantasy booking to retrospectives comparing it to other times new stars beat established legends. The discourse will eventually become exhausting, will probably devolve into the same arguments repeated in slightly different forms, but that engagement, that obsessive analysis and discussion, is proof that WWE created something meaningful, something that transcends just being a good match and becomes a cultural moment within wrestling fandom. And that's increasingly rare in modern wrestling where everything feels predictable and predetermined, where shock value is manufactured through cheap swerves rather than genuine surprise outcomes, where we're so conditioned to expect certain things that actual surprises feel almost uncomfortable because they violate our understanding of how wrestling is supposed to work. Oba Femi destroying Brock Lesnar on SmackDown is either the best or worst decision WWE has made this year depending on your perspective, depending on whether you value protecting established stars or building new ones, depending on whether you believe Oba has what it takes to justify this massive push or whether you think he's being set up to fail under impossible expectations. What's not debatable is that this was a genuine shock, a real surprise in an era where surprises are few and far between, a moment that will be talked about for years regardless of what happens next. I'm choosing to be optimistic, choosing to believe that WWE knows what they're doing, that they see something special in Oba Femi and are willing to bet big on that potential, and that we're witnessing the birth of the next great WWE superstar. But I acknowledge the risks, acknowledge the possibility this doesn't work out, acknowledge that we might look back on this as the moment WWE's desperation to create new stars led them to make a short-sighted decision that damaged one of their most valuable assets. Time will tell which interpretation is correct, but regardless, Friday night on SmackDown was unforgettable, was genuinely shocking, and proved that WWE can still surprise us when they're willing to take real creative risks.